Hello, this is my restoration project on Carthage Jail. I'm Jared White, and I'll be telling the story about how I created this 3D model, as well as the story behind Joseph and Hyrum Smith's death at this location, as well as Willard Richards and John Taylor that were there with them. So this is the model that I made. There are a lot of things that I had to do with it because, or a lot of things I had to do with the software because it wouldn't do what I wanted to. So that was an adventure in itself, but it was kind of fun. This part, for example, is supposed to actually be some more of these stones with another window right here for an attic, which I'll talk about where it is a bit later when we go upstairs. But it's just an example of me having to make things up as I went to actually recreate this. There's a back door here, and as you can see there, I put, like, I'm sure they did a little bit of growing or farming around for their own vegetables and stuff, so I put that there. The trees are hard to be accurate, really, because it was 200 years ago. We don't exactly know what trees or where the trees were around this building, but nonetheless, this is the building itself. As we enter in this front door, we will see that there was just this small area that was a stairwell up to the second level with a little extra space to oversee. And then as we look right here, we'll go into this door. This was more or less the jailer's family's area where they lived. This is the jails back then. A lot of them, at least the smaller ones, were actually ran by somebody who lived there. So this was his living area and his family's. And then this was a bit of a kitchen and some tables and cabinetry and stuff. And that was that back door I showed you. And as I go back out here, we will see that the first night that Joseph and his company stayed here, they actually stayed down here in the debtor's cell. The debtor's jail, they had no furniture, they just slept on the ground. This was for people who just weren't making payments or were in trouble, but they weren't like criminals. So they were locked in here, which actually has bars over the windows as well. But they were locked in here to stay. Debtors were that weren't like as big of criminals or problems. But as we go back outside and as we take our way upstairs, we will see straight ahead is the actual jail. They didn't stay in here because they, oops, that guy's actually not supposed to be there yet. Here's a good example of me using um, using some makeshift stuff because these are gates that I made into an actual jail cell. Best way I could do it on the software. But this is where they're supposed to stay, but it was gross, never cleaned. Willard Richards in his account says that he actually, like, there was rodents and it was gross in there. So that's what allowed them to stay downstairs. Then after having breakfast with the jailer the next day, he actually granted them the ability to stay in this upstairs room, which will be right here in a moment. This was just a small door that went to the attic. It was just a little cutout where they were able to get up into that attic where that window was supposed to be from the outside. I told you the software wouldn't allow me to make. And here in this room, we will see what is the actual room that Joseph and Willard Richards, John Taylor, and Hyrum Smith actually stayed at. They were here at the time that they were attacked and murdered. It was here in this room. And so here's the story I wanted to tell more of that I learned about from Willard Richards and John Taylor's accounts, as well as other further studies. So as we look here at this slide, this is a good example, and this is something I almost forgot to include. This was an addition. You'll see that today if you were to visit Carthage Jail, but this is actually a later addition. It was not on the jail or on the house around the time that they were staying here and when they were murdered. This was added on later. So this is not actually on my model because it didn't exist at the time. This is how I actually I found a study by BYU by David W. Lyon and I think his brother, another Lyon, where they got the exact measurements. So this is actually exactly what I based my project off of. This is not just, I didn't just make this 3D model. This is to scale. There's 2-foot thick walls. This wall right here was one of the only walls that wasn't stone. It was 5 inches. The stairs were 8 inches or a foot tall by 8 inches deep, and there were 32 of them, or 32 inches across, and the outside was 24 feet by 38 feet. So these were all like exact measurements to what it actually looked like, with a little bit of incorporation of ingenuity of using gates for jail cells. But when you're actually in it, it looks cool. So I call that good enough. So back to Joseph and them. While they were staying in here around 5 o'clock or so, the Carthage Greys came to attack them. So they heard people coming and riling up and coming up the stairs, and so Hyrum, Joseph, all of them, Willard Richards, John Taylor, all came to the door to block the door. As they were standing in front of the door, somebody actually shot at the keyhole, presumably because they thought it was locked, and it went right between them. And so they realized, we're at danger by standing by this door. So they actually backed away towards this corner to be out of the way of the bullets. However, Hyrum Smith decided that he would actually stay right in front of the door and hold it because he knew what was about to come. So he actually stayed there, and that's how he was shot in the face. He was leaned up against the door, and they shot through the panel. And then as he stumbled backwards, he was actually shot from the window from outside. Somebody from down here shot him in the back, and that's what made him collapse. And as he was laying here, this is where the blood stain probably actually came from, is the shot that was in the back. So he was laying here on the ground as the rest of this attack ensued. So John Taylor, Willard Richards, and Joseph Smith quickly reacted by actually looking at his brother and then going to the door and sticking his hand around the corner with the pistol that was given to him, and he fired off 3 shots, clicking it as many times as he could. 3 misfired. So that is probably why they didn't continue to try to come in the room, but rather just stick their barrels in the door and shoot. The shot that actually hit Hyrum Smith was shot right from the top of the stairs, went through the door, and hit somewhere right here, according to this laser pointer that they did as the study, just below the window. So that's how Hyrum was actually shot. Then, as they were standing here in this corner, they actually had a stick, and they were using it to bat away any of the guns that people were sticking through the open door and trying to shoot, and they were hitting the bayonets away. John Taylor, who recognized he really didn't have a whole lot of chance to do much about it while he was in the room, thought maybe he could get away with getting outside of the room to help. So he walked towards the room, or towards the window, and was shot in the back of the leg, almost fell out the window, shot right near the heart, but it hit his pocket watch that made him fall on the floor, and he stayed right next to the bed. Probably tried to get underneath the bed a bit, but that's where he laid the rest of this going on, because he had been shot 2-3 times. Willard Richards still hitting the guns with the stick. Joseph recognized that they were here for Hyrum and they were here for him, and there was no need for John Taylor and Willard Richards to die. So he went to the window, was shot multiple times, and actually fell from the window, jumped from the window. That's debated on what actually happened, and tried to lift himself back up after he fell out the window. And this is while he was propping himself up on the well. That was where he was actually shot multiple times and murdered to its fullness when he was laying here on the ground. Willard Richards, looking at him from the window, out the window from where he fell, this is why a person was put in here, he actually took John Taylor into the jail room, and hid him under some mattresses so that he would be safer hidden, because he wasn't going to be running or doing anything himself. But after all of this, Willard Richards was never actually injured, and after Joseph Smith was murdered, they had their way, and the Carthage Greys were pretty much done, because soon after, Mormons, as they called it, they yelled out, "Mormons are coming. We're coming down the road," and so they fled, so that they were not in a battle after that point. And so Willard Richards and John Taylor lived to tell the tale, and they explained all of what emotions led up to it, but as well what actually happened in this room and how Joseph fell, how Hyrum was shot, and what they did to try to defend themselves. So I hope that this, as well as this last slide, gives a good understanding more of how it occurred, how only two of them died, what was going on. But this is essentially the whole story, the best of our knowledge, by the account of Willard Richards and John Taylor as to what happened at Carthage Jail. And here is one last look here at what was my, sorry, that's just a 2D vision of it, of my model of the Carthage Jail. Thank you. I hope it helps enlighten what actually happened here at the jail, and I hope it brings better knowledge to Joseph Smith and how his martyrdom actually occurred.